can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. That thought has been lingering in my mind ever since the latest developments surrounding General Hospital began circling back to one of its most haunting and symbolically loaded locations, Wyndemere Castle. I think there's something deeply unsettling about the way the story keeps pulling us back there, almost as if the place itself is not just a setting but a force, something alive in its own quiet, ominous way. I feel like the castle isn't done with the people of Port Charles yet, and I could be wrong, but this is just my interpretation. Wyndemere may not just hold secrets, it may actively shape the fate of those who dare to call it home. In my opinion, the idea that Wyndemere could be cursed doesn't feel far-fetched at all. If anything, it feels like the only explanation that ties together the tragic pattern surrounding the Cassadine family. For years, the Cassadines were synonymous with power, control, and a certain cold elegance. But what became of them? One by one, they fell through death, imprisonment, or exile. I think it's hard to ignore how many of those stories intersect directly with that castle. Take Victor Cassadine, for instance. He lived there, thrived there even, orchestrating his schemes with chilling precision, and yet his ending was brutal and final. I feel like Wyndemere didn't protect him, it simply watched, as though it had seen this outcome coming all along. The same could be said for Nicholas Cassadine. He once ruled that castle, but now he's reduced to a life behind bars, paying for choices that spiraled far beyond his control. I think there's a poetic cruelty in that fall from power, and I can't help but connect it back to the environment that shaped him. And then there's Spencer. His story feels particularly tragic. A young man born into a legacy he didn't fully understand, tied to a place that seemed to carry more darkness than history. He is presumed dead, his body never found, which only adds to the eerie pattern. I feel like Wyndemere doesn't just witness tragedy, it absorbs it. It leaves behind unanswered questions, unresolved grief, and a lingering sense that nothing there ever truly ends. Valentine Cassadine is another example that reinforces this uneasy pattern. Once a resident of the castle, he now lives on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder. I think it's telling that no one who has deeply tied themselves to Wyndemere has managed to walk away cleanly. There's always a cost. There's always something taken from them, whether it's their freedom, their family, or their life. Now, Ava Jerome presents an interesting contrast. In my opinion, she may be one of the few who sensed the danger and acted on it. Selling the castle to Sidwell might have been one of the smartest decisions she's ever made. I feel like on some level, Ava understood that staying there meant becoming part of its pattern. And yet, even she wasn't untouched by its influence. Her confrontation with Esme at Wyndemere is a perfect example. That moment could have easily ended with Ava losing her life. I think it's chilling to consider how close she came to becoming another victim tied to that place. And even later, when Ava attacked Nicholas, believing at the time that she had killed him, it's as if the castle amplified the worst instincts in everyone involved. I feel like Wyndemere doesn't just host conflict, it intensifies it. So this brings me back to the question I can't quite let go of. Is Wyndemere cursed? I think there are two ways to look at it. One is the supernatural angle, the idea that the castle itself carries some kind of lingering curse, perhaps tied to the Cassadine legacy or even something older. The other is more psychological. I feel like Wyndemere might attract a certain type of person, individuals who are already dangerous, already walking a moral tightrope. And in that isolated, imposing environment, those traits are allowed to grow unchecked. In my opinion, it might even be a combination of both. The castle is physically isolated, cut off from the rest of Port Charles, surrounded by water, and steeped in history. I think that kind of setting naturally lends itself to secrecy, to control, to a sense of detachment from normal consequences. It becomes a perfect refuge for people who operate outside the law or outside the bounds of morality. And now we have Sidwell as the new owner. This is where things start to feel even more unsettling. I think it's no coincidence that the moment Sidwell takes possession of Wyndemere, tragedy begins to circle his life as well. His connection to Natalia, who has already died, and more recently to his son Marco, whose death adds another layer of loss. It feels like the pattern is continuing. I could be wrong, but this is just my interpretation. The castle may have already begun to claim its next victims. Marco's death is particularly interesting to me. Yes, it didn't happen at the castle itself, but he lived there. I feel like that connection is enough to keep the pattern intact. Wyndemere doesn't need to be the location of the tragedy. It just needs to be part of the person's life. And Sidwell, I think he's standing on the edge of something dangerous. Losing a child can push anyone to extremes, and I feel like the influence of Wyndemere might amplify that instability. In my opinion, it wouldn't be surprising at all if Sidwell begins to lose control, making reckless decisions that set off a chain reaction of events. That's where Willow potentially comes into play. I think the idea of Sidwell drawing Willow into his orbit, perhaps calling her to the castle to discuss a new strategy against Sunny, feels like the kind of move that could escalate everything. I feel like Wyndemere would be the perfect setting for something like that. Secretive, tense, and full of underlying danger. And then there's Sunny Corinthos. If Sidwell and Willow were to go as far as kidnapping Sunny and holding him at Wyndemere, I think that would mark a turning point. Not just for them, but for the entire storyline. Because at that point, they wouldn't just be playing a strategic game, they would be crossing a line that invites serious consequences. This is where Dante comes in, and I think his role could be crucial. As Sunny's son and as a law enforcement figure, Dante represents both personal and legal stakes. I feel like if Sunny's life were put in danger, Dante wouldn't hesitate to act. In my opinion, he would see the situation very clearly. Regardless of Sunny's past or any suspicions surrounding Marco's death, kidnapping and torture are crimes that cannot be justified. I could be wrong, but this is just my interpretation. Dante might be pushed to his limit. If he believes his father is in immediate danger, I think he would be willing to storm Wyndemere without hesitation. And if it comes down to it, I feel like he might even be prepared to use lethal force. That creates an incredibly tense scenario. Imagine Dante leading a raid on the castle, fully aware that the people inside are dangerous and desperate. I think the symbolism of that moment would be powerful law and order clashing directly with the chaos and darkness that Wyndemere seems to represent. And in that confrontation, I feel like anything could happen. Sidwell could be arrested. Willow could face serious consequences. Or things could spiral even further, leading to outcomes no one expects. And through it all, Wyndemere would remain at the centre. That's what keeps bringing me back to the idea of the curse. I think it's less about a supernatural force and more about an inevitable pattern. People come to Wyndemere with ambition, with anger, with secrets, and the castle reflects those qualities back at them, magnified until they can no longer control the outcome. So what happens next? If Sidwell falls, whether through arrest or something worse, then the question becomes who takes ownership of Wyndemere? And this is where Ava re-enters the picture in a way that feels almost fated. I think there's a strong possibility that Ava could end up reclaiming the castle, especially given her connection to Sidwell. But if that happens, I feel like it would carry a heavy sense of irony. Ava, who once escaped the influence of Wyndemere, might find herself drawn back into it. In my opinion, that would be the ultimate test for her character. Has she truly changed? Has she learnt from her past? Or will returning to Wyndemere pull her back into the same cycle of danger and moral compromise? I could be wrong, but this is just my interpretation. Wyndemere doesn't let people go so easily. Once you've been part of its story, it has a way of pulling you back in sometimes when you least expect it. And that brings me back to where I started. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. Because when I look at everything, the history of the Cassidines, the tragedies, the current storyline with Sidwell, the potential involvement of Willow and Sunny, and Dante's looming presence, it all feels like it's building towards something bigger, something inevitable. I think Wyndemere is more than just a location. I feel like it's a symbol of everything that can go wrong when power, isolation, and unchecked ambition collide. And as long as it stands, I don't think the cycle is truly over. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe it's coincidence. But in my opinion, whatever is happening there, it's far from finished.